Oh, commit to something, he said. Why not pick up a book, he said. At least that way, your brain will stay active while you're locked inside, he said to himself, thinking this would be a great idea. Oh, hey, guys, hey. How is everybody doing? I hope it's good. I'm starting to get real sick of this COVID-19 stuff. I hope everybody's turkey farts don't stink too badly. As we dive into episode 16 of Liam Small, Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse, 20 pages at a time, every day, or until the bars reopen, whichever happens first. And listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Today, I'm only doing 15 pages, and probably for the next few, I'm only going to be doing 15 pages, for a couple of reasons. The first one being, I'm pretty sure the bars aren't going to open up anytime fucking soon. Therefore, I'm not going anywhere, and so neither is this. So we've got all the time in the world. I'm going to eventually finish this book. So who cares whether I go 5 to 10 pages or whatever. And also, we get in to chapter 13, and you know what, to be quite honest with you, that's over 100 pages long, so I don't get an appendix, I don't get any sort of shit like that. So you know what, get mad at me if you want, but I don't really care. That's the way it is. I'm doing 15 pages, they're big old pages, and here's, look, the other actual reasons, because between 1750 and, like, DW's time in 1895, have one, it's going to get more dense. So, like, I'm not even halfway through this fucking thing yet. And, we're only, like, within 100 years of DW himself being born. So I imagine the information is going to get pretty dense and pretty nitpicky and boring in a lot of regards. So I just don't feel like pushing myself, to be honest with you. We're lucky I'm still not skipping days and stuff, because I almost didn't do this today. I really don't want to be at this right now, to be honest with you, but I'm gonna. Also, what's going on with the light? It's all weird. Hold on, one second. Yeah. Candle probably doesn't help. Okay, so, for God's sakes. All right, at the end of the last installment, we ended on a note about the seal fishery, which D.W. proves was in existence before 1790, because that's his favorite thing to do, is say something and then back it up and then make a point and then continue to back it up for like 100 pages afterwards. So at the end of the chapter, this is pretty much at the end of whatever fucking chapter we're into now. At the end of the chapter, we touched lightly on the New England trade around 1760, and how the English were beginning to tax the New Englanders. Pardon me, I have one. And we're beginning to tax and maybe a little bit unfairly. Oh, it's around 1760, and the English are taxing the Americans unfairly. So I'll let you guys put together, I don't know, maybe what happens next. War of Independence. So anyway, we'll see what happens down the road. Fuck, my fucking phone is on. Christ. All right, hold on. I got the plug right here. This is a poorly thought out night for me. They can't all be winners, guys. God. Believe me, if it pains you to watch it, it pains me even more to do it. Love you. So we get to the end of the chapter, maybe basically we just ended the point that the English and the Americans are starting to butt heads a little bit, moving the hell on, because I can't wait to get out of this. There's an appendix for this chapter. It's a little graph thing. I really don't, it's just, persons appointed to administer justice in the several districts of Newfoundland in 1732. I'll give you a hint, they were probably all white men. Moving on to chapter 13, Reign of King George III from 1760 to 1820. This is a 60-year reign, which, if you think about 1760 to 1820, moves through quite a bit of, moves through quite a few world events, we'll say. So I'm going to run down through some years here as we do. So again, I mentioned this chapter is like 100 fucking pages. So there's a few dates here off the top. So I'm going to try and go through those a little bit. That's going to summarize important dates, from 1760, right up to 1819. for the reign of King George III. So these are things that we're going to hit on periodically over the next, I don't know, math, 6.5 episodes or whatever that works out to be. So in 1762, St. John's, Carbonear, and Trinity are captured by the French, and then it's recaptured by the English in the same year, in September, by Colonel Amherst. The Battle of Kitty Vitty happens then. 1763, the war. So also just to note, 1762 is like where we end today's episode. So that's how much King George III gets done. Also, you got to remember that records are being kept a lot more studiously at this time. So he's old DW, our buddy there, got a whole lot more to go on. So it's just gonna be a lot. I'm tired. Okay, so in 1763, England goes to war with Spain. Importation of fish from Newfoundland now prohibited. Treaty of Paris. St. Pierre-Miquelon confirmed to France. All the rest of North America given up to England. Survey of the island by Captain Cook. Labrador re-annexed to Newfoundland. 1763. That's a whole lot in 1 year. 1766. Riots in St. John's and at Harbour Grace. Lieutenant Cartwright made an unsuccessful attempt to effect friendly intercourse with the Beothils. And the repeal of the American Stamp Act. I don't know what was going on with American stamps at the time. In 1774, Continental Congress in America. All the exploration of Newfoundland from North American states was prohibited. Quebec Act 14, George III, 83, Labrador annexed to Canada, not Newfoundland. So 1776, the Declaration of Independence in the United States. In 1782, independence of the United States now acknowledged by England. So that only took 6 years. 1783, the Treaty of Versailles. The French allowed to fish from Cape John to Cape Ray. Declaration of King George that King George III, that the English were not to interrupt the French fishery by their competition. In 1784, religious freedom established in the colony. Some fellow named Dr. O'Donnell was the first Roman Catholic prefect. Aspath. We got one. Listen, Catholics aren't being persecuted anymore. 1788, Bermudan vessels fishing in Newfoundland. There you go. In 1789, we have the French Revolution. Court of Common Pleas established for the colony. Skipping a few. In 1794, the murder of Lieutenant Laurie, RN. France declares war against England in 1794. In 1795, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was embodied. Commander Colonel Skinner, the first colonel of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. There you go. I felt like that was an important one. 1796, the French destroyed Bay Bulls. England and Spain at war. Dr. O'Donnell, consecrated Bishop of Thyatira in fucking Latin. Okay, and he was the first Roman Catholic bishop. That first guy I mentioned a second ago gets a promotion to bishop. Good for you. 1799, the first grammar school opened here on the island. I felt like that was important. 1800, mutiny in the garrison at St. John's. I'm sure that'll be a fun read. 1803, the Newfoundland Light Infantry was formed. In 1805, the first post office was established in the colony. Man, we got it all! 1807, the Royal Gazette, a Newfoundland Advertiser, first published. I assume that's a newspaper, or they're calling them pamphlets back then. I guess that's the same thing. Just a bit of gossip, a bit of news. What's the weather going to be like? We don't know. 1809, Labrador and Anticosti re-annexed to the government of Newfoundland by Act 49 of George III, which also established permanent courts of jurisdiction in Newfoundland. That's good. We have our own court system. 1810, the proclamation to protect Red Indians. Sir John Duckworth was the governor. In 1812, the Second American War, known as the War of 1812. The harbor of St. John's is full of prizes. Cool. Volunteer force reorganized. 1815, the Second Treaty of Paris, the last treaty made between England and France about the Newfoundland fishery, confirms the Treaty of Versailles, 1783. Numerous failures caused by the peace and the depreciation of fish in foreign markets. 1816. We're in the 1800s now. This is like, you're a great few greats. Tack a couple greats on there, but we're getting closer to present day. 1816, St. John's nearly destroyed by a fire. A cargo of provisions sent... Okay, so St. John's nearly destroyed by a fire. 1817, St. John's again revisited by fires. November 7th and the 21st. 200 houses destroyed. The Winter of the Rals. And then in 1819, case of Butler and Lundergan. Not sure who those guys are, but it's also the year of the Great Fire in St. John's. That was a hard decade for fires in St. John's. So... whole lot of dates there, ranging from 1760 all the way up to 1820. We're getting through like the first two of those today, so 15 pages at a time. Okie dokie. So yeah, 60-year reign with a lot of dates. Okay, I got a note here, but I'm going to justify my 15 pages a day. I think I checked that box. There's a note here that George's reign is actually the... like one of the longest reigns and most eventful reigns by an English monarch to date. By that point, it was actually pretty wild. The quote here on page 304 says, "It witnessed great disasters and great victories, the loss of the American colonies, the overthrow of France in 3 great wars. It commenced when the British Navy was neither well organized nor in uniform. It ends with making England the greatest sea power the world has ever seen, and the British fleet a real invincible armada, which had beaten every nation in a fair fight, a fleet from which Spanish and gallant French officers were carefully instructed by their respective governments to flee away on the wings of the wind. It begins with the bungling appliances of the 18th century, and it ends with steam, macadamized roads, the English telegraph, the railway, and the steamboat. Our own history also advances with this age of progress. We pass away from the fishing admirals into the modern epoch, with roads, education, responsible government, and courts of justice. This later Georgian era is the transition period in our history between the bad old days of tyranny, corruption, and violence, and the dawning of a brighter days of civilization and progress." That's pretty... Sounds like King George III might be the only king so far who... I mean, there's a couple other good, like, decent monarchs, but it sounds like King George III really did a whole bunch of stuff. So, here's to you, King George, and here's to the things that I have yet to find out about King George, I'm sure. I'm not Wikipediaing this shit in the time that I'm not reading this book. That'll be a later thing. Maybe I'll do a whole 80-part series on King George III. So, at this point, in the first year of King George III's reign, he appoints this fella, Webb, with 2 B's. Webb, he appoints him the governor, and Webb was more hands-on. He was more into capturing stray French vessels, going off and, dealing with things like more in person and stuff. Then he was the type of stuff like writing letters to and from governors or debtors or that sort of stuff. He was, I don't know if that helps. DW made a reference to that here in the book, so that's that. And on page 305, at this point in time, so though the war was raging with France, so this is 1761, just for keeping the timeline. The war was raging in France. The colony seems to have been very peaceful and orderly, and fairly prosperous up to the end of 1761. After their numerous defeats, the French were anxious for peace. To secure favorable terms, and especially a share of the fishery, it was most desirable that they should capture some English possession. Their well-served English intelligence department informed them of the defenseless state of St. John's at the time, its neglected military condition and weakened garrison. On our capital, therefore, they made their successful attempt. Whilst England had been spending millions of dollars on the colonization and defenses of Nova Scotia, St. John's, once again I might add, was left with less than a single company of soldiers, 63 men, and all the forts in a state of decay. Because when has that ever... It's literally not learning from your mistakes, like, multiple times in a row. Like, every time the French see an opening, they come here and, like, burn the place or take the place. And they're like, oh, we should defend it. And we've got people here now, we defend. And then the French go away. And then we somehow retain it, and then we don't defend it or keep anything there until the French get another big idea, and then they just come do it again. Fuck, we're bad at this. Okay, yeah, so in 1762, the French sent ships. They were spotted, but they escaped in the fog. Eventually, they came back and they took Bay Bulls, and then they started marching for the fucking city. When the intelligence of the capture of St. John's, Carbonear, and Trinity, and the devastation of the trade and fishery reached England, the English ministry were loudly and universally blamed for the neglect of the great Chatham's advice. By the way, this fella Chatham, he was like a governor or a commodore, or he had some title, and he was the guy in this case, like we've seen in every other story, he was the guy that goes, hey, like, maybe get a few guys on the go over here, let them make, at least let them know how to use guns, right? So yeah, Chatham, they were like, why the fuck didn't you listen to Chatham about the defense of the colony? And then of course it was embarrassing for England. Fortunately for our island, the governorship of Newfoundland had been entrusted to one of the bravest and most skillful naval officers of the period, the distinguished Captain Graves. Afterwards he became Lord Graves. And we get to him. So yeah, this is amazing that they just keep doing this over and over. Yeah, there's a bunch of details about just how and which way the correspondence went down in defending the other parts, of the island outside of St. John's. The English rushed to set up the defense in Ferryland and Placentia. Colonel Amherst, think Fort Amherst. Colonel Amherst at the time, he's another fellow. Now, this guy was in New York, and so he came up with a crew of the Royal American Regiment or whatever. And this was like some talented fucking SEAL Squad 6 unit among who's like, there was like Swiss guys and German guys in this thing. It was like, a real, I don't know, it was pretty interesting actually. And anyway, they headed for St. John's. And, this wasn't going to be easy because of the huge French presence that now occupied St. John's and how well defended St. John's was. So the English were okay in the other cities, stations, colonies. Anyway, the other spots, but they still had to get St. John's back. So it wasn't going to be easy. So they've got Amherst. They've got what's his name? Graves. So there's Graves. There's Amherst. There's a couple good hands on the go. So the French tried to stop Amherst when he landed in Torbay. So that's where Amherst first came out. He came in Torbay, and the French were unsuccessful in stopping him. So right after that, Amherst storms towards Kitty Vitty, like by land, and they get down to like around Kitty Vitty there, and then they moved. Apparently, I don't know if it was under night or beyond the sentry or whatever, under watch, but basically they got up Signal Hill undetected. And, like, soon after that, the English had the French surrender just on lock. So, I mean, fucking Amherst just went right. I mean, he Luke Skywalkered it. I mean, he just went right up to Signal Hill. I mean, didn't even try by the harbor, came in and just went straight to fucking town. So, that was cool to read. Soon after, the English took it back in 1762. And I have a quote from our buddy. On page 309, it says, the fleet and the army cooperated with singular harmony and success. Both the whole plan and the subordinate parts of the expedition were conducted with consummate wisdom and heroic bravery. Because he doesn't really mention where... He mentions, the debate between the French and, like, where it all came from, but he doesn't really mention Graves. The Graves just stayed in Placentia. Sorry, I touched my face. I'm going to be touching my face. I can't stop touching my face. It's all I want to do. But he... so Graves stayed in Placentia, stayed there defending. And Amherst did all the work in taking back St. John's. Good for you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Treaty of Paris. Which is kind of like the Treaty of Utrecht, but arguably more stupid. So DW, at the beginning of this section, he wants us to understand that understand the events leading up to the Treaty of Paris before we get at it. So we have no choice. He wrote it. We're gonna read it. George III came into power in the middle of the 7 Years' War. So they needed, the English and the French were at war at the time. And I've got a note here that just says, page 310, fuck it, just read it. Okay, this is maybe a little bit of a chunk. This doesn't look too bad. Okay, so when George III came into the throne, the 7 Years' War was still in progress. Frederick the Great was gallantly fighting France and Austria, the alliance des Trois Cotillons. Three petticoats, Maria Theresa, Empress of Austria, Madame de Pompadour, and the Madame de Pompadour. Come on. And the Empress of Russia. So, yeah, the Russians are back. Remember we gave them a brief shout out in, like, episode 4? I don't know anymore. Anyway, so, the English had beaten the French at sea, in the East, in the West Indies, and in America. There had been one fatal miscarriage at the print is all fucked, for which Admiral Byng was shot, according to Voltaire, killing one admiral to encourage the others. Pitt, in order to balance the loss of Minorca, captured Belle Isle in the Bay of Biscay. Then there's negotiations for peace. There's 1761, blah, blah, blah. Did I make a note here? Page 310, fuck it, read. Yeah, so England and France are negotiating. France is getting bold, saying they want fishing rights to Newfoundland for them and the Spanish. So while they're discussing, between the signing of the Treaty of Paris and 1713, the French are starting to make some demands, right? And they're getting a little bit bold, and they're starting to ask for fishing rights in Newfoundland, not for just them, but also for the Spanish. Why? Oh, I don't know. How about because of a little secret alliance between the French and the Spanish at the time? Yeah, now, remember our buddy Chatham, or Chatham? Names. I can call him Chatham. Anyway, remember that guy Chatham from before? Anyway, so he's in England at the time. He figures this out, that, like, what's going on between the French and the Spanish, and he wants to, like, go to fucking war with Spain right away, like, just drop it, because he finds out that Spain is basically just waiting for a bunch of ships to arrive back in Spain, so they can basically declare war on England anyway. So this guy could have easily changed the tides of history. Another great dude. And he wanted to get the drop on Spain too, right? So the next year, so Chatham actually resigns or something because they don't want to do it, so he resigns in protest or something. This next guy who comes up behind him is this dickhead named Boot, B-U-T, Butte, and he's, like, corrupt and shitty. And then, so after this was discovered, he resigns, this guy Butte shows up, but at this point it's inevitable. England has to declare war on Spain, so as soon as this Butte guy gets into power, he's basically got to pull the trigger and do what was started anyway. They go to war immediately with Spain, and the English beat them in Portugal, Cuba, and Manila. Their commerce was destroyed, and their fleets were fucking annihilated. So, good job. You won another. It's a lot of battles and treaties to keep track of. If you're not, like, a history person like me, if you're not a history person like me, not a history person like, anyway. I've had a couple of wines. I'm not gonna lie to you. So the Spanish and the French want peace at this point. After the Spanish get their asses kicked, now the Spanish and France are kind of like, oh, well, how about instead of all those arts and everyone's like, how about we get a little bit of peace on the go? So the English insist, at this time, we're not doing a second Treaty of Utrecht. So this is going to be a whole new deal, okay? If we're going back to we're not revamping the old one. This is a whole new thing. So in 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and the English once again gave fucking, like, everything away. They said it wasn't going to be a second Treaty of Utrecht, but it basically was, except maybe worse, because it's stupid that you did it twice in a row. Pardon me, not the COVID, smokes a lot of weed in the afternoon. So, okay, so yeah, they gave it away. They fucking... Where is it? In one short year, they destroyed them. It was so annoying to read. So, the English ceded the fishery of Saint Pierre to France. They gave Cuba to the Spanish, which were two key fishing areas at the time. The French still had, I'm pretty sure, still had their shore and stuff. But again, they just gave it away. They could have been like, okay, there's peace, this is it. But no, they were like, okay, well, France, you can have Saint Pierre, which is right next to your old colony. Like, why would you give that away? It's one of the best fishing spots, like, on the fucking go. And then you give Cuba away to the Spanish, which is another great foothold for... Oh, man, they're just... And why? It's because, again, of fucking corruption and bribery. It's actually what holds these pages together is fucking corruption and bribery through what seems to be every other guy who gets in power. And in this case, it was this fella Butte. You want to see a picture of him? This guy. Corrupt. Dickhead. We could be down in Cuba right now. Imagine if Cuba was a part of Newfoundland, right? History could be fun. So at the bottom of page 311... The folly of the English ministry in ceding the fishery and Saint Pierre and Miquelon to France had nearly been eclipsed by a still more outrageous proposition. A strong party in the ministry were in favor of restoring Canada to France. Just give them back Canada. It was mainly due to the strong protests of the American colonies through their most able diplomat, fucking Benjamin Franklin, that it was prevented. Thank you, Ben Franklin. You should be on our fucking money. They were just gonna, yes, man, give Canada to the French. Yeah, we beat them in a war, but they're gonna surrender or whatever, or make a treaty, but we're just gonna basically give them... The secret history of the treaty, which is now laid bare, shows the ministry in their very worst light. This is gonna be a long quote for a second. Shows the ministry in their very worst light. They voluntarily offered to restore the fishing privileges given under the Utrecht Treaty, which I mentioned. In the commencement of the negotiations, France agreed to surrender Canada, provided she was allowed to keep Cape Breton and enjoy the fishery in the St. Lawrence and on the banks of the island of Newfoundland, which they kind of already had. Just keep what they had and take fucking everything else. The fortifications of Louisbourg were to be destroyed and the harbor laid out to common use. So even their big stronghold in Louisbourg was going to be leveled just for the English. The English ministry flatly refused all concession of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, or Canada. They would give the right of fishing in Newfoundland if the stipulations about dismantling of the French fortifications at Dunkirk were agreed to. They might have Saint Pierre on 4 conditions: that the island should not be fortified or troops be stationed there, no other vessels should be admitted there, even for shelter, the harbor should be used for our own fishermen alone. Number 3, that the possession of Saint Pierre should not be deemed to extend in any way the stipulations of the Treaty of Utrecht, that is to say, a bunch of fucking Latin. From the place called Cape Bonavista to the northern extremity of said island, and hence running westerly to the place denominated Point Rich. Up and up, down, around. Number 4, that an English commissionary should be allowed to reside at Saint Pierre, and the commander of the British man-of-war on the Newfoundland station should have liberty to visit the island and see what these 4 conditions were, complied with. All good. The French were dissatisfied then, because they didn't want Saint Pierre. The French didn't even fucking want Saint Pierre. They said it was too small, it was too near Placentia, that it would not serve as a shelter, and it would create disputes between the two nations. They would prefer Prince Edward Island or Cape Breton. And finally, they agreed to accept Canso. Finally, when the English ministry threw in Miquelon, they then accepted the terms and took Saint Pierre as well. So, they didn't want it. We were here, have it. As usual, the whole commercial world of England was opposed to any concession of Newfoundland fishery to France. The commerce of England had suffered very much from the French Navy and the privateers of Dunkirk. They knew that the fishery was a great source of wealth to their enemy and the chief nursery for her seamen. On strong national as well as commercial grounds, they sternly opposed the concession. Well, there you have it. So the treaty was It was hated on by, they didn't want to do this. Everyone else was like, what are you doing? Why are you? It doesn't make sense. What's bribery and corruption? And then, as a result, after it was all said and done, what was the final result of the vote in the English Parliament or whatever about the Treaty of Paris? Well, notwithstanding all of these attacks and all intelligent opposition, the treaty was carried by the immense majority of 319 against 65 in the corrupt House of Commons. Well, there you have it. So, they just fucking... Oh, we've gone and done it again, man. The old signature move, hey? Just, like, what makes sense? Yeah, let's do the other thing. It's no wonder where we are where we're to, boys. Result of the vote. And then right at the end of this little thing, we start talking about Sir Thomas Graves. Pardon me, have a drink. He was a great guy who defended the island while he was in power. Like, fuck, pardon me. He became a lord eventually, Thomas Graves. The cool, methodical way in which he sets to work to defend the colony, his admirable arrangements, his lucid judgments, his entire freedom from the bigotry of the age mark the high qualities of one who, in the age of naval heroes, was distinguished for his undaunted courage and skill. His fight with the French admiral largely contributed to Lord Howe's victory on the Mount. His terrible duel was one of the most stirring passages of the English. For his gallantry, he was created Lord Graves. Everybody liked Lord Graves. And he was on the go. He defended Placentia back when Amherst was kicking ass in St. John's. And that's... and the other thing was we do get into him a little later, I think. He was a great leader, apparently, and he also had to clean up the mess. So after the Treaty of Paris was signed, I'm pretty sure Graves was the guy who was in charge of getting things back to fucking normal, because now we're coming back out of wartime again. So we're in, we're out, there's wars, there's not wars, there's Spanish, there was Russians at one point. I only did 15 pages, and it was still 32 minutes so far, so good thing we only did this much. I think this is going to be a real dense chapter. Lots on the go with George III, I guess. Stay healthy, stay safe. No new reports here in the Avalon today. That's good. Just because we didn't hear about it doesn't mean it's not here, but it's at least a step in the right direction. Hey, happy to know you didn't have it 2 weeks ago, right? Okay, gang, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for listening to another edition of Liam Small Abridges, A History of Newfoundland by D.W. Prowse. 15 pages at a time every day until the bars reopen. Take care.